Welcome to the Q&A for the documentary feature film from Taiwan, No Man is an Island. My name is Ellen Chang, and I'm Director of Arts and Culture at the University of Washington Taiwan Studies program. I will be moderating this Q&A with Director Jay Chern. Welcome, Jay.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Okay. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of No Man is an Island, could you tell us a little more about yourself and also where you are zooming in from?
I'm zooming in from Taiwan. I'm in Taipei right now. I actually grew up in Dallas, Texas. I did my undergraduate studies in film and video at University of Texas at Arlington. And then I decided to do my graduate studies in Taipei at Taipei National University of the Arts and did directing there. And then I started, shooting some narrative. And this is my first documentary.
Well, thank you for that. So also thank you for working the time difference with us and joining us in this crazy hour. I know it's morning in Taiwan right now. Early morning is always like very tough for filmmakers, I believe. So I think time and timing also kind of play a big part in No Man is an Island. We have the 14-day mandatory quarantine when time feels stopped for the travelers, and also the making and viewing of this documentary film, which is at the same time about the past that took place in 2020, but also the present, right? Since the pandemic is still kind of with us. So can you tell us what inspired you to make this documentary film, and also how did you get involved in this project?
I think it was an interesting development where, again, like I spoke to a little bit earlier, I haven't shot a documentary before. So in the beginning, I was in talks with the foundation when the pandemic started. And when the quarantine hotels were starting to kind of roll out and being set up in Taiwan, I thought at that time it would be interesting to kind of just record. Like, I didn't even know if it could be like it originally, the idea wasn't to like make a feature film or anything. It was just to kind of record and document the quarantine workers. Mm-hmm. And then also Rebecca, the Hans House owner, and kind of follow their journey. Why did they decide to kind of help the Taipei city government to kind of be the kind of leading face of like quarantine hotels? Because in the beginning, when we started, it was like February of 2020. So we didn't really understand COVID. We knew there was this outbreak. And then when Taiwan was like locking down, or there was talks about locking down, and then kind of because of the lockdown, there would be a need for quarantine hotels because of the mandatory 14-day quarantine for anyone returning to Taiwan. The government wanted a lot of kind of official spaces where people could quarantine safely, but have like protocols in place so there wouldn't be kind of local spread. So it was quite interesting, like thinking back to that time, because the news from the States was basically, oh, this is not a big deal. COVID will be over by summer. And then Europe was just starting to kind of start, like certain countries were like having outbreaks. And then I think so Taiwan was really early in trying to preempt it, kind of worried about, like already thinking long-term, worrying about the effects to the whole medical infrastructure. But I think that's really because Taiwan had experience with SARS.
Yeah.
And in the West mostly didn't. So yeah, Taiwan was highly impacted by that. I wasn't in Taiwan during SARS, but based on like when I started shooting and talking to everyone or interviewing, like that was like a big a big part of it that was brought up.
Yeah, I was in high school when that happened, but still, when my mom told me about COVID like starting to spread, I was like, where did you get that fake news? I was like not believing in it at all. So it's definitely a very tricky time when you start shooting. But I think for like audiences in the US may not be familiar with the mandatory quarantine and the hotel that went in place in Taiwan. And I wonder if you could share with us your personal experience of it as someone having a close family member, your mother, traveling back to Taiwan and staying in the hotel. And if you went through the 14-day quarantine, we would also love to hear about your experience staying in the hotel room alone for 14 days.
Yeah, so I didn't have to quarantine since I didn't leave the country. And they did allow me to experience kind of being like locked up a little, but it was different because like they asked me if I wanted to quarantine, kind of, just to know like how I felt. But I only quarantined for like 3 days, so it didn't really count. And
it's like literally a hotel stay, not
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And but I just the experience, because they had like certain signs, and then like you couldn't leave the room, and then just like kind of see the process within, and it just allow me to like shoot some like I guess B-roll for the documentary, and then experience it a little bit. But yeah, it was very different because like when my mother had she was living in San Francisco, and it was because my grandmother like fell, and she was 96 already, and so someone needed to help my uncle take care of her. They were living together, and he's working, and so when the mandatory quarantine went into place, my mom was looking for a quarantine hotel, and that's when I thought it was a good opportunity to be able to kind of shed some light on how it would feel to be. I keep going back to the word locked up because you really can't leave, and then also they send text messages to you every day, and then they actually track you, on your phone, so you can't leave the hotel. And there's like really stiff fines if you do leave your mandatory quarantine. So yeah, it is kind of like being locked up, and then even though you're being serviced and it's a comfortable environment, I think the psychological effects, and then also because the whole worldwide pandemic, it was, I thought it would be interesting to actually see that being documented. And because in the beginning, because quarantine hotels were such kind of a new idea, it was difficult to find people who are willing to just kind of like document their everyday kind of thoughts, on film, whether it's through a cell phone or a GoPro, so which my mom used. And so since it was a family member, she didn't have a choice, actually. Yeah.
So yeah, being locked up is already very challenging, and then you're making a film out of that experience and also other people's experience of being locked up. I really cannot imagine how tough that is to film at the quarantine hotel when the hotel staff was under so much pressure and overwhelmed by all kinds of anxiety, so much that one of the staff already wrote her will in case anything or something went wrong.
Yeah.
So as a filmmaker documenting this process and then even partaking in some of the hotel maintenance tasks, what was the hardest part of making this work?
I mean, I think the hardest part was, it ended up being out in the documentary where, we, as part of like the film, as part of the team that was allowed to film, we kind of had to go through the same training as the housekeepers, as the workers, the cleaners. So every time we were shooting inside, we had to, change the N95 masks. We had to wear protective gear, face masks, etc. And just to make sure that, we were also protected, along with the workers. And then also like leaving the quarantine hotel, not going to any public spaces, going directly home, cleaning all our clothes, and then kind of self-quarantine like during that process. So kind of during that process while we were shooting, even though locally Taiwan wasn't on lockdown, and then Taiwan's COVID numbers were very low, and the city was relatively open. During the first probably 6 months while shooting the documentary, basically the crew is very small, but the crew would not meet with anyone.
Yeah, that's just really like tough for filmmaking, I think, because it's always like working with each other, talking together, eating together, and doing everything together as part of that filmmaking experience. So, but then I guess I have a follow-up question for that, because in some way, No Man is an Island can be seen as a collective filmmaking process, like with the two students and your mother self-documenting their lives in the quarantine hotels. Can you tell us a little more about what it was like working with them, and how did you connect with them in the first place? How did you guide them through this self-documenting process and eventually editing those footages?
Yeah. I think it's a lot like the Zoom call where, we're using either FaceTime or, Google Meet or Line video. And I connected through the students through their foundation. So they were just kind of asking a lot of the guests that were booking the quarantine hotels when they were coming back, and then who was tech savvy enough to be able to record themselves and who was willing. So it was a combination of challenges. And and in the beginning, because the whole quarantine hotel where, like you said, was a kind of a new concept, and the staff was busy enough. Most quarantine hotels like didn't allow for crews to shoot or kind of document the process. So I think I was quite lucky to be able to work with their foundation and be able to kind of see behind the scenes. And so it was definitely so originally the idea was just to get some footage from inside the hotel, but like once like the guests in their 14-day quarantine, but once I started talking to them or asking them some questions, I thought it'd be a good idea to kind of record it as like a diary, like kind of a vlog, and then see if it could be used in editing. So it wasn't planned definitely to use all their footage, but I thought it would be a good insight to see from the different perspectives of how COVID kind of affected everyone's lives, and why people were willing to go through the quarantine, and what was kind of the story behind that.
Yeah, I have to say your mother was very impressive.
Yeah.
Like with the camera and doing all those, like remembering to turn on the camera at some points and things like that. Like making those very meaningful footage. I think that was really impressive. And I was also very touched, but also very worried when Rebecca, the owner of the quarantine hotel, arranged for you to surprise your mother with the Mother's Day meal. Looking back now, what was the most memorable part of making that film? Probably aside from that, since I already mentioned
it. I guess memorable part. I again, like I don't know. I keep going back to like because every day, or when we did go into the hotel, like of course after maybe the first 3 months, we didn't go in like every day, and maybe just a couple times a month. But every time we went back, it was like there's this very strict protocol. And in a sense, it was interesting where I think, in the States, looking from the perspective of the US, it'll be like, oh my gosh, there's like so many restrictions and kind of like you're giving up some freedoms, right? So and I thought that was an interesting dynamic where, yeah, we are giving up some freedoms to not be locked down and to have more freedoms. So it's like it was kind of a give and take, where, and then but again, I think this is a big culture difference where Taiwanese are definitely more, I don't know. I don't know if I can use the word obedient, but in certain aspects, everyone's willing to kind of play along, and for kind of the greater good, and give up some freedoms and not make it like that big of a deal. Whereas I think it's very difficult, like if there was mandatory quarantine in quarantine hotels, there are probably like protests, like in the States.
Like when you actually really think about what is happening with that quarantine protocol, it's just very hard to describe how Taiwanese are so willing to work together and then to fight against COVID.
Exactly. I mean, because like a lot of the things, like even like where they text you every day to check, like you have to reply with your temperature. I mean, even though it's in the documentary, like because it's more like informational, it's not like I hope that the documentary would be more like character driven and more like a narrative film in a sense. And but they track you on your phone, and in that sense, there is a lot of like invasion of privacy, right? But it's kind of for the greater good in a sense. So I think that balance is definitely difficult to define, and I think trust in the government has to be high for everyone to allow that, and know that this information will only be used for medical purposes. So but I think the results do show. I mean, since even though Taiwan, in 2021 had the kind of mini outbreak, but even the mini outbreak, it was only like a couple, like at most, it was like a couple hundred cases a day. And, percentage wise, compared to the other countries, it's really low. So I think Taiwan like was quite successful in kind of containing the pandemic.
Yeah. And I think this kind of goes into my next question. Like me as a Taiwanese who actually went through quarantine twice last year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, for some crazy reasons. Taiwan's hyper alert COVID preventive measure certainly makes me feel really safe. Despite the fact that I would actually prefer to have all my comfort food from the night markets while I was there. But I think from this documentary, thank you for documenting this and also for showing the case numbers in Taiwan in the context of the total number of cases worldwide, to help audiences that is outside of Taiwan to understand how the careful measure played a role in the significantly lower number of positive COVID cases in Taiwan. However, as we just discussed, and you must be aware of, like Taiwan's hyper alert preventive guidelines do generate like heated debates in Taiwan and overseas, especially for people who have to travel back and forth or in and out of Taiwan. So I guess from your multiple roles and perspectives in this film project, what do you hope audience take away from your film?
I really hope everyone who has a chance to see the film really, like, I think they're like, after like editing the film and kind of going through like discussions of what the title would be, I think going back to like choosing like "No Man is the Island," the John Donne quote, I think that's kind of the takeaway, where we all have to kind of come together to solve like big problems. And we can't really do it alone. And I think the documentary kind of shows that, where whether it's just the cleaner or the person who's coming in to kind of do the disinfectant sprays, and then or just delivering the meals, and then going home to take care of their family. Everyone everyone is worried in the sense that they could kind of bring back this virus to someone that they really care about. And I think that's very universal. And even beyond the pandemic, I think, in our lives, any type of struggles or difficulties we might face, it's tough to face things like completely alone, or kind of overcome obstacles. So I think in that sense, I was hoping that because film could convey that, the more we work together, the more we communicate, and kind of, especially I feel like in the last couple of years, like whether it's politics or any type of online discussions, it seems to be very polarized. Instead of trying to find the common ground, it's always about like maybe tearing one side apart or the other side. So I thought, even though the pandemic it was terrible, and COVID really affected everyone, hopefully through these stories, or even through like a documentary that's talking about the quarantine hotel process, hopefully people can take away that we should try to come together as a community more than less.
Yeah, and I think your choice of the film title is so on point, especially when I think in this past 2 years, Taiwan has so often been described by the media as the island that COVID forgot.
Yeah.
We obviously are not. I mean, we have significantly lower numbers and everything like that. So I think that was a very great like dialogue or a response to that kind of description of Taiwan during COVID. And I think my understanding is that this will be the North American premiere of No Man is an Island at the SAAFF, right? So I was wondering, like, what has it been like to share your films with audience during the pandemic? Like, or is there any difference between showing to the audience in Taiwan versus showing to the audience in other countries?
Well, so far, I don't think anyone outside of Taiwan has seen the film as far as a collective. So I think in Seattle, it'll be the first time. So I'll be very interested to hear the audience reactions, and it did have a theatrical release in Taiwan, so people were able to see it in theaters. And so even though in theaters, there were strict, like, oh, you have to wear masks and stuff like that, but we were still able to have Q&As, and especially a lot of the screenings, there were a lot of like social workers or people who worked at hospitals or were nurses, we got a lot of positive feedback from them, and they felt they were seen, or and kind of like what they were going through. I think they're like kind of invisible heroes, right? So it's like there's so many people who they're just going about their daily lives trying to survive and make a living, for their family. But the pandemic really makes it difficult, whether they're just a taxi driver or if they're a delivery person. There's, because of COVID, their work becomes more dangerous, and we kind of need that, even with the whole kind of transportation and shipping
Mhm.
supply chain crisis, right? So I think everything is being affected, and I think it's not easy. So
Mhm.
I thought so it was nice to be able to kind of hear, the feedback from them, and it'll be great to know, yeah, how uh kind of foreign audiences see it who
Mhm.
don't understand how Taiwan took care of COVID, and then kind of learning that information, and
Mhm.
it'll be great to hear.
Yeah, and also really appreciate how you spend so much screen time to let the staff have like monologue, like moments of
Mm,
monologues telling their what they feel or their anxiety, things like that. I think the part where I think it was the cleaning staff who were kind of complaining how she didn't like the decision of opening
yeah,
the hotel as a quarantine, and then was also worrying about being fired because of that,
yeah,
kind of thinking those are like moments that really tells the story, and all the, as you say, the story of the invisible heroes who make sure the world still operates when COVID hit us like very harshly, right? And like Ruth. Um, so I was wondering, since you mentioned you were able to have some Q&A in Taiwan when you have the film screened, um, is there any like memorable questions you were asked about your film? And I'm wondering if there was, what was your answer to that?
mm, mm. I mean, I I feel like I guess because in Taiwan, most of the audience member, I mean, they lived through like what was documented in
Mhm.
in 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 the documentary. I think from their perspective, it would like most of their questions were kind of focused on like, oh wait, but how could you shoot in the 14 days like quarantine?
Yeah, that was
How, or
my
how did they shoot?
question
Yeah,
too.
which you asked. So I think that was like the main, or they were surprised that I guess I showed up in the documentary. Maybe that's a spoiler, but but yeah. So I think, or the film crew. So that was part of it. And, they were interested in that process because I think that's the process that most people don't have a chance to experience, and I think that's the reason why I decided to put it in the film. Also, I thought it was a very easy way for audiences um like kind of like from a first person's perspective of the
Mhm.
housekeepers and the staff of the quarantine
Mhm.
hotel, like what they would have to go through on a day-to-day basis, just to work or just to do their jobs properly,
Mhm.
and yeah, that protocol. So I think that was the biggest kind of question that was brought up.
Mhm. Yeah, because when I was watching the film, I know what you were shooting about, and I understand the protocol, and I also agree with how people should work together to fight COVID together. But I think for an audience who is foreign to that culture, there definitely will be a very different, I think, understanding also and also response to your film, just like what we were talking about, right? Like how it's almost like crazy how much freedom we were willing to give to get another kind of freedom back in
Yeah.
return. Like when I was experienced the scanning QR code to keep track
Yes.
of things, I thought that was smart, and I thought it was just perfect, right? But when I came back to the States and trying to explain that to my friends, it just all of a sudden becomes something else, right?
Yeah.
Like privacy
That's
issue and
crazy.
so many different things, right? It just
That's so
becomes so
Orwellian.
complicated.
Yeah.
Like being in
Exactly.
there and trying to describe to others what was going on there, it was like just totally different things.
Yeah, yeah.
So I
Yeah,
guess
you're allowing people to
yeah,
track your like every movement. Yeah, every
yeah.
restaurant you go to,
I wasn't
every
really worried
convenience
about
store.
like privacy or something when I was
Definitely.
doing that and being part
Scanning
of
it.
that. But then when I was trying to describe it, it's become so problematic.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So
again, yeah, I think that then that again goes back to like, is there like a high level of trust with like the community, with kind of the politicians or the people who are supposed to take care of you, which is the government, right? And I think, based on all the, I guess, the international news, I guess there's not so much trust with the people and the government in the States right now, so that's why it's so divided. And I think, I guess in a lot of the world, it's like that. So I think, if they can build that trust more, then people are more willing to kind of be nuanced in the sense of where it's like, okay, yeah, of course, this information could be used for nefarious reasons, but in this case, we're just gonna protect everyone and make sure everyone's healthy.
Yeah. I'm also very happy like how that turned out to be good. Although there's like little pump where almost there's a crazy outbreak, but we managed to bring it back to like another kind of normal. So yeah.
And that's why we didn't want to, in the documentary, we didn't want to shy away from, Taiwan wasn't perfect in any sense, where, because of politics, they were trying to, or kind of corporate pressure, certain quarantine hotels that kind of caused the outbreak was, there was, along with the airlines, like it was kind of like the pilots, they had like, they're supposed to be, they were the ones flying around and going to different countries that had really high COVID cases. So you would think, based on all the precautions that Taiwan was taking, that they would be under even higher or more restrictive measurements. Yet during that time, when kind of the outbreak was starting to occur, we found out, like it was reported later in the news, that they were allowed to do like 5 plus 5 plus 9 to be 14 days, meaning they only had to do 5 days of mandatory quarantine in a hotel, which basically makes that mandatory quarantine useless. And then they were allowed to do the final 9 days like in their apartment, but then they weren't tracked. Like they could just leave and then like go out to restaurants, and that's how kind of the local spreads like kind of started. So that caused a lot of kind of discussion or kind of uproar, where it's like, hey, everyone else had to do the 14 days, then why didn't they? So obviously they changed that immediately after after it was reported. So
which again shows how this is a collective like process, right?
Exactly.
I went back right after that, so I was so mad at them because they so but
exactly. Then the restrictions were more, and then we had to give up kind of, like you said, other freedoms, because of a few. So it was quite interesting.
Okay, so finally, I think the question that always switched me from the professional moderator to a movie fan, gossiping mode. So what's next for you? Are you currently working on any film projects, and are you able to tell us anything about them?
Recently I haven't. I've just been like kind of, working, and because even though Taiwan was pretty unscathed, compared to the rest of the world as far as COVID, there were still a lot of like shooting restrictions. So as far as like working, like shooting commercials and stuff like that, there was a lot of restrictions about like how many people could kind of gather together indoors, outdoors. So for that first year and a half, a lot of like projects were delayed, and it was kind of like this year, like kind of the last half of 2021, and then even into like the first couple months of 2022 has kind of been playing catch up, and kind of like, just finishing the projects that were kind of due, whether it was, it was basically just commercials and just so nothing's super exciting. And as far as like, if I can hopefully get back to making another feature film, I don't have anything that I'm going to shoot like immediately, but I just been writing and hopefully developing whatever that will become, like the next idea that could become a film. So I'm kind of like in a really early process right now. Yeah.
I mean, that sounds exciting.
I hope
Maybe
so.
not
I
at the
don't know.
moment, but eventually.
I'm not sure. Yeah,
But-
because like, yeah, my first feature film was in 2018, like it was released in 2018, Omotenashi. So I think, yeah, and then I haven't been able to like travel, right? And everyone hasn't been able to travel. So like so my first film was like mostly shot in Japan. So I feel like, yeah, I think my next film, I'll probably try to shoot it in Taiwan because there's still so many restrictions. And but I would like to shoot it, you know, in the States or somewhere else around the world. But you know, until that's a possibility, I think I'll probably just, you know, continue writing and then try to prepare. Yeah, but yeah, I have nothing is like in the works already. Yeah.
No, but please keep us posted whenever
Definitely.
you have new works. We'll love to see more of your works at SAAFF.
Okay, great. Thank
Yeah,
you so much.
and maybe consider Seattle as your next shooting location.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, whenever you're back here.
Okay, great.
So thank you, Jay, for joining us for this heartfelt conversation. And thank you to the audience for taking part in SAAFF's 10th Annual Film Festival. Remember to vote after watching films for the Audience Choice Awards. You can check out the other great program playing at SAAFF's right now, available virtually from March 3rd to the 13th, 2020 at bit.ly/SAAFF 2020. So thank you again.